or someone? Okay, guys. I have been watching a very good series by Aaron on the, what is it called? Prophetic Research Institute. And I highly recommend it. And this stuff is kind of all from there, particularly his one on reform lines. So when our movement, years ago, we started out with this chart, right? And, it took a lot of work, and, we came up with this pattern that we thought all the reform movements went through and lined them all up. And I know I use this a lot to share with people. So what does this say? 2010 down here in the corner, I think. Anyways, it's quite a few years old now. And this was a very powerful tool that I used to use to share with people, right? Like, this is the lines. This is basically a pictorial representation of what Jeff's first message was, basically the increase of knowledge. This was the formalization of the message, of the first angel's message in a pictorial form. So not necessarily did we know all that at the time, but we just said, okay, well, here's why it's important to understand the Bible like we do. We show people, here's what's happened, and when you put all these lines together, it's going to paint a picture of what's going on today for us. And our movement, or the messages that have been coming out of our movement for a long time, have touched this essentially in different aspects. There's, light comes out about Ezra 7:9, the first day of the first month, and goes, in directions for a while, which, zoom into certain parts of this chart or that particular line, and we get a whole bunch of new truth and find an understanding and realize, oh, maybe we had the line a bit wrong, and so we reformulate it, and on it goes. 1989 zooms into a part of our line, and you just get to, throughout the time, the 2520 comes along and highlights different portions of the line and how they mesh together, and so it's been a journey, is what I'm saying, basically. And we've went a lot of different directions. Not necessarily were they the wrong directions, or not necessarily at first would you understand how they all connected together, but they did. And so we're here, however many years later, and there's a series done by Aaron for basically people that don't speak English, because the whole thing's translated. So he draws these lines in a simple form. And what I believe is that kind of a series is the building blocks of what we are going to be able to share with Levites, because there's nothing in it that's you have to take a big leap, or you have to already believe. He's broken it down in a way that is very shareable to somebody who doesn't speak English and somebody who essentially doesn't speak the language of our movement. And it was very powerful to me. So what I'm going to go through here today is just the way that he put the lines on the board, and we can refer back and forth, just to consider some of the changes that between what we have had in the past and what we have now. But I believe that what we have now is very powerful when you do the same thing. Basically, essentially, he lines up all these lines, one on top of one another, kind of like this. Where is it? Right here. So you have essentially that chart over again in a whiteboard format, leading you down to, us and the end of the world. But so let's start at the top. Sorry, my computer's faster than the Zoom. And so he starts off, or, I should quit referencing him now, but in this type of a presentation, it's easy to start off with what and what an Adventist would know. You have the great controversy template of what you're starting in a place with common ground. So you're giving them you start off with a presentation that they already believe and will accept 100%, right? You have the great controversy starting with, okay, Ellen White says the time of the end is 1798. You've just come out of 3.5 times, or 1260 years of the Dark Ages. There's an increase of knowledge and a formalization. There's 1844. You have your Sunday law, Daniel 12:1, your second advent. Okay. And laid on top of that, to make sure that, you don't get out of line with anything, you have your what do you call it? The growing, the plowing, the early rain, latter rain, and harvest. Your
agricultural model.
Thank you. Agricultural model. So you have a template. You give them a template that now you're locked into following, that they agree with, right? And so one of the ones that I was really happy about was Noah's line. As you can see on this chart over here, we don't cover Nehemiah or Moses on this presentation, but we got Noah, Elijah, Jesus, and the Millerites. With Noah's line, it's quite simple. Like, there's not a lot of details filled in there, right? But the way he did it, there was quite a few details that we were able to fill in, and it's all very simple. Right here in Patriarchs and Prophets, we've got them all in about 98, 99. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6 paragraphs. Okay. So you're not requesting that they read pages and pages or books and books of the Spirit of Prophecy to come up with this. Like, it's all right here. And I think we'll go through it a little bit here, so you can see it for yourself. Okay, is the screen big enough for you guys right now to see? I just want to make sure that it.
No, not for me.
Okay, so I will make it bigger, and I will zoom across. How's that?
Beautiful, thanks. But you don't have to do that for me. I mean, I don't want to be selfish.
It's okay. We'll go back now. So here, this is not new. This is all old, but with a really sweet flavor. Okay. Allison, you can read.
Yes, I can read.
Go for
Sure. The period of their probation was about to expire. Noah had faithfully followed the instructions which he had received from God. The ark was finished in every part as the Lord had directed, and was stored with food for men and beasts. And now the servant of God made his last solemn appeal to the people with an agony of desire that the words cannot express. He entreated them to seek a refuge while it might be found. Again, they reject his words and raise their voices in jest and scoffing. Suddenly, a silence fell upon the mocking throng. Beasts of every description, the fiercest as well as the most gentle, were seen coming from the mountains and the forests, quietly making their way towards the ark. A noise of a rushing wind was heard, and lo, birds were flocking from all directions, their numbers darkening the heavens, and in perfect order they passed to the ark. Animals obeyed the command of God, while men were disobedient. Guided by holy angels, they went in two and two unto Noah into the ark. And the clean beasts by sevens. The world looked on in wonder, some in fear. Philosophers were called upon to account for the singular occurrence, but in vain. It was a mystery in which they cannot fathom. But men had become so hardened by their persistent rejection of light that even in this scene produced a momentary impression. As the doomed race beheld the sun shining in its glory and the earth clad in almost Eden beauty, they banished their rising fears by boisterous merriment, and by their deeds of violence they seemed to invite upon themselves the visitation of the already awakened wrath of God.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Now, I didn't actually put in here where God calls Noah, but there's a Bible verse that I would put up here for that. Quite easy. I mean, obviously, we all know that God told Noah the dimensions of the ark. So the wickedness of man was great upon the earth. You have your time of darkness. God's called Noah, and we can also line up with called, chosen, and faithful, right? Like just like the three angels' messages over and over and over again. However you want to put it, I think there's got to be double-digit ways of saying, those three steps in the three angels' messages. Does anybody have any offhand that they can say right now? You guys know what I'm referencing, right?
Yeah, you're doing the fractals. I remember, but I can't remember them offhand. Yeah, no, I know what you mean though.
Sin, righteousness, judgment,
Perfect.
justification, sanctification, glorification.
Right.
So they all line up within our line, right? You have they're a accountability to make sure that you are putting everything in the right column, and it's a way to describe what's happening to the God's people, right? So God calls Noah, the ark is built, he calls the people, right? And then he calls the animals, the unclean and the clean, okay? And in Peter's vision, we all know that the unclean are the Gentiles and the clean animals are the Jews, right? So you have three classifications of people that are calling, just like priests, Levites, and Nethinims, right? the wonderful manifestation of God from bringing these animals upon the ark. And basically the faithful get on and the door closes, just like Daniel 12:1. You have your angels getting on the ark, just just like at the Sunday law time period where the loud cry goes out to the world. You have this glorious manifestation of the power of God. And it lines up very well, right? Sorry, I got distracted there for a moment. Okay, does that sound good to everybody? What else did I want to say here? Back over here. So God commands Noah, come down, all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteousness before me in this generation. Noah's warning had been rejected by the world, but its influence and example resulted in the blessing of his family. As a reward for his faithfulness and integrity, God saved all the members of his family with him. What encouragement to parental fidelity. Debbie, would you like to read this next one?
Sure. Mercy had seized its pleadings for the guilty race. The beasts of the field and the birds of the air had entered the place of refuge. And if I may pause just for a moment from the previous one that Ali read, when it said the sound of a mighty rushing wind, or pardon me, of a rushing wind, and all the birds coming from all directions and everything. You highlighted the word wonder, made it bold, Trevor. And in all honesty, in Noah's day, even though none of us were there, the impression that all of these animals coming and then these birds flying would have been great on everybody who was onlooking that whole scene. We had opportunity one time, parakeets have overtaken an area in the south of Kauai, and just by a few domestic pets being released into the wild and just thriving and basically taking over. Anyway, every night at sundown, at sunset, the parakeets come back to all the various palm trees and whatever kinds of trees in that whole area. And it is a phenomenon I'd never seen before in my life. And believe me, the sound of their wings, the sound of the noise that budgies make, parakeets make while they're flying, and so it was just incredible. So the antediluvians had very much evidence of God at work. Anyway, continuing on. Noah and his household were within the ark, and the Lord shut him in. A flash of dazzling light was seen, and a cloud of glory, more vivid than the lightning, descended from heaven and hovered before the entrance of the ark. The massive door, which it was impossible for those within to close, was slowly swung to its place by unseen hands. Noah was shut in, and the rejectors of God's mercy were shut out. The seal of heaven was on that door. God had shut it, and God alone could open it. So when Christ shall cease his intercession for guilty men before his coming in the clouds of heaven, the door of mercy will be shut. Then divine grace will no longer restrain the wicked, and Satan will have full control of those who have rejected mercy. They will endeavor to destroy God's people. But as Noah was shut into the ark, so the righteous will be shielded by divine power. Patriarchs and Prophets 98.2.
So if you're paying attention to this paragraph, she's doing exactly what we're doing in pictorial form. She said to do what we're doing in that paragraph, right? She talks about this event, God had shut it and God alone could open it. So when Christ shall cease his intercession for guilty men, she's comparing the end of the world to Noah's end of the world. And we're just doing it in a very detailed way in pictorial form. So this just sharing from this place gives power to why you're doing it on paper, right? Does that make sense?
Amen.
And for 7 days after Noah and his family entered the ark, there appeared no sign of the coming storm. During this period, the faith was tested. It was a time of triumph to the world without, right? Jacob's time of trouble being described exactly. The apparent delay confirmed them in the belief that Noah's message was a delusion and that the flood would never come. Notwithstanding the solemn scenes which they had witnessed, the beasts and the birds entering the ark, and the angel of God closing the door. So they witnessed that. It wasn't just the door swung closed by itself. It's the fact that they actually seen it. They still continued their sport and rivalry, even making a jest of these signal manifestations of God's power. And it reminds me of that, the parable, if you are what Jesus said, if you don't believe the law and the prophets, then one rising from the dead wouldn't change your heart, right, or convert you. They gathered in crowds about the ark, deriding its inmates with a daring violence which they had never ventured upon before. So they were actually trying to get in there and kill them. Like, is that what you're seeing in this? Am I stretching it?
Emboldened even more so to such a height. And this is after the manifestations of God's intervention and God's working in his glory. Wow.
Just like the wicked are going to raise their swords against the righteous, and they'll fall like straw because God won't let them, right? And then we have here, but upon the 8th day, dark clouds overspread the heavens. There followed the mutter of the thunder and the flashing of lightning. Soon large drops of rain began to fall. The world had never witnessed anything like this, and the hearts of men were struck with fear. All were secretly inquiring, can it be that Noah was right and that the world is doomed to destruction? And so I was reading this, and it says here, water appeared to come from the clouds in mighty cataracts. I had to look up the word cataract, and it actually means waterfall. It's like there was waterfalls coming out of the clouds. So anyways, that was kind of neat to me. But throughout this paragraph, this 5 paragraphs, you can pull out this whole line of Noah. I mean, throw in the verse in the beginning where God calls Noah, basically, but and it itself compares itself to the end of the world, just like the line above it. And just like at the second advent, where there's going to be a black cloud the size of the man's hand with the Lord coming, the waters from the earth and heaven The sky is darkened, and there's cataracts from the sky, right? We have our 7 days. They try to just destroy God's people or get into the ark. But the people of God felt abandoned. They're in Jacob's time of trouble. And I think that when you share this with people who are not, there's a difference between sharing with people that are on board with something already and people that are new or may have heard preconceived ideas against it or whatever. But when you share these things in such a way that it can't be gainsaid or manipulated or seen in a false light, that's what I believe brings the power, that there is nothing to gainsay against it. They may agree or may disagree, but they won't be able to give you a reason why they disagree from what you have just shared in this line, I believe. And I believe that in the beginning, we very much had that the way that Daniel 11 verse 40 was shared, even though, we were maybe not sharing everything correctly. We would have been sharing everything in a way that the average Seventh-day Adventist would have agreed with, proving texts with, what do you call it? William Miller's way of proving texts. I'm lost for words today.
Proof texting?
Proof texting, and just it was all stuff they were familiar with. Like, I remember the pastor came to my house to, assess me, or I don't know what his business was here. Basically, at the end of the day, he told me to stay away from the sheep, right? But when he asked what I believed, and I shared with him, what I believed about the time of the end and about Daniel 11 verse 40, he at the end, all he could say was, well, I can't argue with that, or he really didn't have anything to say. And I believe that is the way that this is designed. I mean, you really take away people's ability to wiggle out of what we're sharing if you can do it in such a simple, clear manner. Any thoughts so far?
The word used in the Bible, which I think you already used, Trevor, gainsay. They can't gainsay. And it's the convicting power of the Spirit of God, really, that brings home to the heart. And it has done that throughout history, whether with a Felix or whoever it happens to be. Many are convicted, but they turn away from that conviction, and eventually, if their life closes, they can end up finding themselves lost. But yeah, it can't be gainsaid. One quick thing, I was pretty sure you meant not fell abandoned there, felt abandoned, and you said it that word, so I was just glad you.
Thank you. And so, because we've looked at the Millerites line and Christ's line and our line, there's a lot of people that have covered a lot of this stuff many, many, many times in depth, probably way better than I would. I didn't focus so much on them, but we're going to look at Elijah's a little bit now. How much time do I got left?
About 25 minutes.
Okay. So this is a line that hasn't, as far as I've seen of the videos and stuff, there's not a lot of people that have covered it in depth or anything. And in the other chart, there was a couple of things in it in the beginning that didn't per se line up so great, or at the end there wasn't a lot, of detail, right? And another thing that we've changed is our 5, right? We have our 5 main waymarks. And in these ones, I've noticed that it's kind of, they have 4 points with things in the middle of them, but just the structure has changed. And I believe the change of that structure has really helped us to simply put these lines together in a more debatable way. Sorry, I'm accidentally clicking all kinds of stuff here. That's enough. So we have our basic line here. There's 3.5 years with no rain. God calls Elijah. And in the other line, we had a few other things, but this is how Aaron put it on the board. He builds the altar. So this call to Elijah, God calls Elijah twice, right? He calls him to give the message that there's not going to be rain for 3.5 years. He sends him out in the wilderness and to the woman of Cherith. And then he calls him again after the 3.5 years. So not, just so there's no confusion to when he's called. There's 2 callings. And so we'll go with the pattern of the one that is after the 3.5 years, where he goes and meets Ahab and says, okay, let's have this showdown between Christ and Satan, essentially, right? And this reform line, I think, is very powerful because it incorporates the fire from heaven that we see in Revelation. Is it 13? Where Satan's allowed to even bring fire down from heaven. You know what I'm talking about anyways. So I think it can really help us to understand where we're at in the chapters of Revelation that are speaking about fire from heaven. And there was another thing, because in this story, God doesn't allow Satan to light his idol on fire. But in that Revelation, it describes that the beast is able to bring fire down from heaven. So we have like a compare and contrast that we can do with that. But that's going to help us to pull out more information about that story. And I think that there's some powerful things that we can glean out of that. There was that. And just the reason that I highlighted that word wonder in the last story is that in Revelation, when John wonders after the beast, there might be some sort of correlation there, but I haven't really thought about it yet. So we'll just go quickly through here. I'll probably just read some of the bold. Among the mountains of Gilead, east of the Jordan, there dwelt in the days of Ahab a man of faith and prayer, whose fearless ministry was destined to check the rapid spread of apostasy in Israel. So they're to completely apostate. To Elijah was entrusted the mission of delivering to Ahab heaven's message of judgment. He did not seek to be the Lord's messenger. The word of the Lord came to him. And so here we go. After the 3.5 years of drought, at last, after many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go, show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. Okay, so he's called after 3.5 years. And right here, there's no debating it. But there is apprehension in the hearts of the priests as they remember that at the word of the prophet, the land of Israel for 3.5 years and a half has been destitute of dew and rain. So we get to our first waymark here, the rebuilding of the altar that we talked about earlier. In the reconstruction of the ancient altar, Elijah revealed his respect for the covenant that the Lord made with Israel when they crossed the Jordan into the promised land, choosing 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob. He built an altar in the name of the Lord. And so when he did his presentation, he says, these 12 stones are represent the 12 tribes. And, that's the 144,000 or the church. When he first said it, you wonder, okay, well, did he just come up with that on his own, or was that hidden manna, or what? So, but anyways, I found it in the spirit of prophecy, just to really, like I said, if you're sharing with somebody that's not accustomed to hearing these things. And because in this line you have over here there's a whole bunch of rain, right? When the cloud comes, the small black cloud the size of a man's hand is coming, and then there's a whole bunch of rain over here, right? So you got to be careful when sharing, because according to our agricultural model, you want to have the water and the plowing and everything in the right place, right? And so you've got to really understand which rain or which water you're referencing for your line for it to be in the right place. Because I've had issues with that before, where I'm like, okay, you got this story and you're trying to put it on a line, and there's 3 different types of water in the story, whether it's a river and rain and a bucket of water or something. You're like, okay, well, which one goes where, right? And so these lines really help take away the guesswork of that. The altar completed, the prophet makes a trench about it. Having put the wood in order and prepared the bullock, he lays the victim on the altar and commands the people to flood the sacrifice and the altar with water. Fill 4 barrels, he described, and pour it on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran about the altar and filled the trench also with water. So we've gone from our plowing to our rain, right? I feel like I've got this in the wrong place. Yeah, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so I got these quotes in the wrong order a little bit. So anyways, next, no sooner is the prayer of Elijah ended than the flames of fire like brilliant flashes of light descend from heaven upon the upreared altar, consuming the sacrifice, licked up the water in the trench, and consuming even the stones of the altar. The brilliancy of the blaze illuminates the mountain and dazzles the eyes of the multitude. And in the valley below, there were many watching in anxious suspense the movements of those above. The descent of fire is clearly seen, and all are amazed at the sight. It resembles the pillar of fire which at the Red Sea separated the children of Israel from the Egyptian host. And so we have that very much as our center waymark, the wonderful manifestation of God lined up with our center waymark here of the animals getting on the ark, right? So you have a very, which is going to line up with that, your Sunday law. You're going to have your loud cry going out to convert the world, or the Revelation 18 angel coming down. And then there's even a cry in the story. Oof, I really got these messed up. Something happened here. Oh, here we go.
That paragraph. Yeah.
I've doubled up. I think I cut and pasted twice. I'm not sure here. Anyways, the people on the mount prostrated themselves in awe before the unseen God. They dare not continue to look upon the heaven-sent fire. They fear that they themselves will be consumed, and convicted of their duty to acknowledge the God of Elijah as the God of their fathers, to whom they owe allegiance. They cry out together as with one voice, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." So, I missed the part where he says, "Choose ye this day whom you will serve," but they answer with one cry, right? And the priests of Baal witnessed with consternation the wonderful revelations of Jehovah's power. Yet even in their discomfiture and in the presence of divine glory, they refuse to repent for their evil doing. They would still remain the prophets of Baal. Thus, they showed themselves ripe for destruction, that the repentant Israel may be protected from the allurements of those who have taught them to worship Baal. Elijah is directed by the Lord to destroy these false teachers. The anger of the people has already been aroused against the leaders in transgression, and when Elijah gives the command, "Take the prophets of Baal, let none of them escape," they are ready to obey. They seize the priests and take them to the brook Kishon, and there, before the close of the day that marked the beginning of the decided reform, the ministers of Baal are slain, not one is permitted to live. The judgments of heaven had been executed. The people had confessed their sins and had acknowledged the God of their fathers as the living God. So we have, going back up to our line, you have a clear cry, and then you have a clear executive judgment on the priests of Baal who would not be converted, and then they go down to the river and slay them. What else did I want to highlight here?
Trevor, just while you're thinking of that, it resonated with the Noah's story as well. The ones outside the ark, probation closed, and their violence against and their mocking of and jesting of even the signal manifestation of God, even heightened higher than prior to the closing of the door of the ark. And likewise with these in the story of Elijah, with the prophets, and they're just the false prophets. They're unrepentant. They'll remain the prophets of Baal regardless of what evidence the living God of the universe gives them. So there's, that's the reprobate heart. There is nothing more God can do, and so they're ripe for destruction. The flood came in Noah's day. All the false prophets were killed in Elijah's day, and it's the judgment comes when there is no more hope to convert a heart back from the abyss, and therefore it's justified, it's justifiable, and it's a symbol of God's mercy. His judgment is a symbol of his mercy as much as it is a symbol of his wrath being poured out.
Amen. That he builds the altar, which is, a witness of the, or a representation of the tribes. I mean, all Israel is watching. So you have your call to the church, but once the fire from heaven comes down, you have your call to the priests of Baal, who all deny the call. But you see within this story also your two groups, and you see them within the right spot, in the line compared to the other lines where they're supposed to be, right? And then Elijah prays 7 times, and then you have the best representation in the whole Bible of the second coming, the small black cloud the size of the man's hand, which the spirit of prophecy says is exactly how Christ is going to come. And then there's a death decree. Jezebel makes a death decree on Elijah, right? And so you have very much all the waymarks for lining this up with Noah and with the great controversy line, our main line, the template line. I wish I had these in better order, but you guys, I think you get the point of what I did here. This is very much, Noah's story was in like 5 paragraphs, and this story I pulled out of Prophets and Kings, and I think it went over 3 chapters, but they're not long chapters, and just paragraphs out of each, right, that were very clear about what our line is saying. And here we go. 6 times the servant returned with the word that there was no sign of rain in the brassy heavens. Undaunted, Elijah sent him forth once more, and this time the servant returned with the word, behold, there riseth a little cloud out of the sky like a man's hand. That the heaven was black with clouds and wind, and there was great rain. Right? So, and then Jezebel, after she hears about all this, still defiant, she boldly declared that Elijah should die. And so you have all the building blocks, very simple, very easy, and line up very well with each other. Able to share it in a way just like this chart used to be right here. It's just easy on a whiteboard. First, the line of the great controversy. Next, Noah's line. Next, Elijah's line. Next, the Omega of ancient Israel, the line of Christ. Very simple. The Millerite line with a few more details because of Katya's study last week, which was a huge blessing. I got those quotes over here. And then our line with the ability to understand a few more things. One of the things that I recognized from that presentation, which was, I don't know why I never thought about it before. It's crazy. But in our time, what I used to preach that Daniel 11:40 was the first angel's message, and 9:11 was the second angel's message. And now I'm understanding that that was also wrong. Surprise, surprise. 9/11 actually kicked off the time period of the second angel's message, but technically it's not the second angel's message. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? If you were going to say, okay, which of our doctrines that we teach is the second angel's message, what would it be? What would you guys say?
Just before that question gets answered, Trevor, are you meaning the distinction between the arrival of the second angel and the empowerment of the second angel?
Just in a simple, the whole thing or whatever. What would you say, just as a simple answer to somebody?
So maybe repeat the question again, and I won't answer it. I just want
What doctrine of ours, out of all the doctrines we preach, would you classify as being the second angel's message to somebody who doesn't know? Pardon?
Is it the 2520?
Okay, that sounds pretty good. What would make you say that?
Because the second angel arrived at 9/11, and that was the message that was formalized between the second and the third angel.
So timing would basically be your answer for that? It showed up at the right time?
Yeah, at the time of the second angel.
Okay. Does it correlate in any way to the second angel's message? 2520, Babylon has fallen. Is there a connection there between those two things that you can think of?
Between which two things? The
2520 and Babylon has fallen?
Yes, I don't know. I wouldn't know how to explain it, I guess. But I would say there would be a correlation.
The correlation. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Katya.
I would just say simply that the correlation is that the 2520 give us the time setting, and time setting gave us the year for the Sunday law. And the Sunday law, it is when you get the message that Babylon is fallen. That would be the correlation on my side. But
Okay,
something else.
That's also a good answer. I like your guys' answers. They are good. But this one was so simple that I don't know. It was just like the lights turned on for me. It's I don't know why. I've never seen it before. The 2520 that Daniel gives to Belshazzar, he gives it to him as Babylon is falling. Does that make sense? They're locked together in that story.
Right.
So simple.
So what you're saying?
So easy.
So
Go ahead, Jonathan. Sorry.
So what you're saying is that the 2520 can be used to lock the second angel's message through, I guess, different lines, right? It's like a symbol of the second angel's message. It's not necessarily the second angel's message, but it's a symbol showing, because it was given in the time of the true falling of Babylon, prior to it as a warning. And so we know with the Babylon falling at Sunday law that the message would have to come beforehand, and that the 2520 is a symbol of that message. It's not necessarily the message itself.
I believe so. Like that's what I picked up from the presentation. But once he said it, it was just like, of course, the many tekel upharsin happens the same night as Babylon falls, if not hours before. It's the same story. It's probably the verse before or whatever, right? So I don't know about you guys, but for me that was a big light bulb moment. Like, okay, wow. Now there's something else that you can share with somebody that doesn't know anything about what we're teaching in a super clear way that they can't really deny. And so that's what my presentation today was mostly about. I found something that basically did this for me the way it did for the disciples of Christ. It caused that burning within me that I had something that would not have to be, that would not need the groundwork laid for thousands of hours of YouTube and experiences that we went through and all these things, but it's something that you could give to somebody like an Ethanum. And I believe that obviously God's timing is perfect and that he is starting to give us the tools to be able to share. And so that's my presentation. We'll close with prayer, and then any comments you have will be appreciated. Heavenly Father, we just pray that your words would shine true to hearts that have not heard them before, to our own hearts, to everybody online and the families represented. I pray that they're simple, they're clear, and they can't be gainsaid. And that, Lord, if we dedicate ourselves to you, we would be able to share in such a way that people may or may not receive it, but at the end of the day, they will be speechless. They will only be able to say that I understand why you believe. And that's our goal and mission, Lord. It's a freedom of choice, and the world can choose you or they cannot. And we just pray that we would give them the tools to choose you. Please bless us this Sabbath day and dwell within the throne of our hearts. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.